Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa marhaba. Bonjour et bienvenue. Welcome to this interview for the Open Borders Institute in partnership with Europanova. We are a small advocacy with the goal of changing perspectives on cross-border exchanges. This week, we welcome Georgina Wright. Sir Keir Starmer has expressed the fact that he would not come back on the negotiations of Brexit, on the deal that the UK had achieved. Nevertheless, I cannot but think after the general elections whether there could be a change depending on who will be in number 10 with regards to the single market. Do you think that we could see in the 5 years that are coming, maybe in the decade that's coming, a readmission, in new terms, of course, of the UK within the single market, or at least a partnership of the kind that Switzerland has with the EU?
I'd start off by saying that I don't think the EU really likes the setup it has with Switzerland. So I'm not sure it's very keen to replicate that. I, as a think tanker, pride myself in never giving kind of, I never place bets on anything. So I'm going to be cautious here as well. I think we need to remember that, British society has sort of had enough of Brexit. They don't really want to have to talk about this. And there is a sense of sort of willingness to get on with things, even though it might not always meet the expectations that everyone had, those who were pro-Brexit or those who were against it. Never say never, I think, is the other lesson we've had over the past couple of years, where we've seen a number of things happen across the world which we didn't think would, were possible and happened. And it might just be that we will see a future British government ask for readmission into the single market, a bit like Norway has, or rather than sort of rejoining the EU. But I don't, my sense, talking to politicians on both sides in the UK, is that's not where they're going, and there isn't a real sort of push in British society to rejoin the single market either. Now, that might be because it hasn't been suggested to them, but I certainly think we need to bear in mind that the willingness now is to really get on with things, to try and have a constructive relationship with the EU, but also to be able to seize some of those Brexit opportunities. And that's the government, but also the opposition have sometimes listed as and whether that's sort of more flexibility on what you do in the finance sector, more flexibility in terms of the partnerships that you create with countries around the world. So, maybe would be my answer, but I don't think, in a way, I think that's sort of a red herring, because we should be thinking about what might a more constructive relationship look like right now that is beneficial to the EU and to the UK, rather than sort of assuming that actually integration within the single market or a close relationship is necessarily the right way to go.
Janet Yellen from the US Treasury has talked about friendshoring in this specific case, and the European Union, the UK, and the US are definitely friends who are meant to stick together and for each other. At the same time, the Inflation Reduction Act has been welcomed as a very aggressive move from the US administration towards the European Union. How do you see those things advancing together? Both the very close relationship, much better than under the Trump administration with Biden, and at the same time, this lack of I would say consideration maybe for the European Union when the Inflation Reduction Act was launched.
I mean, how long do you have, Adam? Because this is an incredibly long and complicated subject, but I'm really glad you asked me about it. I mean, I just published a piece for Institut Montaigne, which is available in English and will be available in French very soon, on sort of the different motivations behind the Inflation Reduction Act and why the United States didn't consult many of its sort of friends and allies. I think the first thing that the Inflation Reduction Act says is, or confirms, is that the United States, like China, has no qualms in placing national preference at the heart of its industrial policy, and that basically means that it's quite willing to support its industry in critical sectors, even if that goes against global trade rules that sort of say we should not be overly supporting our industry because that could upset the kind of balance between different markets and it distorts competition. I think we've seen China doing it for years now, and now we're seeing the United States doing it, not in sort of, both are not doing it in all the sectors, but they do appear to be doing it for strategic sectors. I think this bill is very, very complex. It's predominantly there to kind of strengthen the green tech sector in the United States, and the Biden administration believes that by doing that, by creating market incentives, they will sort of not create a green revolution, but sort of not far off that, and that actually that's the only way to bring down the United States emissions and sort of meet or surpass its climate targets for 2030. So it's like by bringing business with you, by creating new opportunities for renewables and carbon-free fuels and all the rest of it. So they want to create those markets and the innovation to be able to meet their climate targets. So that's number one. Number two, there's also a security imperative. And we were just talking about lessening dependence on China. I think that's quite clear in this bill as well, where they're sort of trying to promote production or sourcing in the United States, or to sort of privilege sourcing from countries with which the United States has a trade agreement. Now, of course, it doesn't have a trade agreement with the EU, and which is part of the problem. But you do see an attempt to try and kind of be again sort of not overly dependent on China or other countries, and try and privilege and put preference in sourcing in the United States or in countries with which you have a trade agreement. And then there's the third sort of imperative behind this, which is really political, which is Joe Biden promised, was elected on the promise that he would create more wealth and create more jobs. This is an opportunity to create more jobs, and potentially a very big opportunity to create more wealth too. And I think there's a view in Washington that actually by maximizing and really strengthening the green tech sector, you're going to have loads of competition, which will bring prices down globally, not just in the United States. And so if you look at sort of all of that, and then there's also stuff in there about bringing down inflation, about supporting, healthcare and health bills, and bringing down, the prices of drugs and all sorts of things. It's a really complex piece of legislation, and to get it through Congress, it really requires some sort of a nifty writing in the bill, and also a lot of negotiation, which simply, that was the focus. It was to get it through the United States, which partly explains also, I think, why they weren't extensive conversations with the EU. The Biden administration is trying to rectify some of the problems there, to try, because what we've seen is basically industry in Europe thinking, well, great, I want to move over there. I get access to all this assistance and money, and also energy bills are a lot lower. The dollar is really strong. The market's really big. This is like a great opportunity. And so the Biden administration is trying to sort of rectify some of that, but it won't be able to change fundamentally the bill. And I think, again, the United States is doing what China has done for a long time. So I sort of, feel that this is sadly, or not sadly, but this is just the way things are going now. And so I think the EU's response is right to think about how it can support its own industry while also remaining open, because there are lots of countries around the world that cannot support their industry the way that the United States or China can, or in fact the EU. So we'll see.